Out here, land isn't just dirt and grass. It's legacy. It's the sweat of your father's hands, the laughter of your grandmother's porch stories, and the roots of every season you've survived. But sometimes, the world forgets. It paves over memories, replaces barns with brochures, and calls it progress. They came with clipboards and bulldozers, convinced they could steal what generations built. But they didn't count on one thing: me. This is the story of how a quiet farmer took on an entire HOA empire and reminded a town what it really means to belong. I hadn't set foot on Red Hollow soil in almost 12 years, not since my father's funeral. But the moment I turned off the county highway and saw the old wooden sign still hanging crooked above the gravel road, Cole Ranch, Estenis 1901, I felt something stir inside me. It was pride, pain, maybe both. The place looked exactly how I remembered it. Acres of golden wheat dancing with the wind, the creaky red barn leaning slightly after decades of storms, and the wraparound porch where I'd sat with Grandpa every summer, sipping lemonade and watching fireflies. Nothing had changed, except everything had. A row of luxury homes now flanked the far ridge, their white exteriors gleaming like teeth in the sun. Driveways curved into perfectly manicured cul-de-sacs. I could see little garden flags fluttering on each porch. They called it Vista Elms, a master-planned community built where cattle used to roam. My grandfather would have spat at that name. I parked my truck beneath the oak tree by the house, stepped out, and just stood there, letting the wind and memories hit me. Bruno, the old hound, trotted out from the barn like a ghost from my childhood. His muzzle had gone gray, but his tail still wagged when he saw me. "Hey, buddy," I murmured, kneeling. He pressed his head into my chest, and just like that, I remembered why I came back. That peace, however, didn't last long. It was just after 2 p.m. when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A white Mercedes SUV pulled up, way too clean for country roads. Out stepped a woman in a crisp, pearl-white pantsuit and heels that sunk into the driveway dust like they didn't belong here, which they didn't. "Hello?" she called, walking up with a yellow paper in hand. "Excuse me, are you the owner of this property?" I stood, brushing hay off my jeans. "Wyatt Cole. My family's owned this land since before the war. Which one depends on who you ask." She didn't laugh. Her eyes scanned me. Boots, sweat-stained t-shirt, calloused hands, and registered mild disgust. "I'm Vivian Harrington, president of the Vista Elms Homeowners Association. We're issuing a formal notice regarding your structure." I took the paper. "Structure. The barn," she clarified, pointing like it offended her personally. "It violates the community's visual standards. Our residents have invested in premium view lots, and your deteriorating outbuilding is depreciating neighborhood value." My eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, this barn's been standing since 1937. It's on my land." "Well, our development has expanded significantly, and per county adjustments, portions of the eastern ridge may now fall under our jurisdiction. I suggest you consult a land attorney." "You suggesting I tear down my grandfather's barn because it ruins someone's view?" I asked, folding the paper slowly. She smiled, tight, rehearsed, dangerous. "You have 30 days to comply before fines begin accruing." With that, she turned, heels clicking, and drove off without another word. Bruno growled low. I looked back at the barn, red paint faded, but proud. 30 days. That was all I had to figure out what the hell was going on, because Vivian might have brought HOA rules. But I had something she didn't: blood, legacy, and paperwork older than her entire subdivision. The barn wasn't the problem. It was the symbol. After Vivian's visit, I couldn't stop thinking about the smug confidence in her voice, as if she'd already won some war I didn't even know had started. I sat on the porch with Bruno at my feet, sipping coffee gone cold, staring out at the ridge where Vista Elms glittered like a corporate vision board. I needed answers. The next morning, I drove to the county office in nearby Hollister Creek. The building smelled like old paper and politics. Rick Jensen sat behind the records desk, same as he had when I left this town a decade ago. He still wore that faded blue flannel and chewed gum like it owed him money. "Wyatt?" He blinked, pushing his glasses up. "Well, I'll be damned. What brings you back?" "Trouble," I said, laying the HOA violation notice on the counter. Rick squinted at it. "Vista Elms, huh? They've been stirring the pot since they broke ground. What's the issue?" "Says here they're claiming part of my land. Something about jurisdiction shifting during rezoning." Rick frowned, pulling a thick binder from the back and thumbing through it. "Rezoning doesn't change deeded ownership. Let's take a look." We spent the next hour buried in plats, surveys, and handwritten records. My great-grandfather's original deed from 1901, amendments from the 1940s, a survey from the 80s when the county tried to build a bypass road through the valley. Everything confirmed one thing. The eastern ridge, where Vista Elms now stood, had been carved out of coal land. Legally sold? Yes, but barely. "What about easements?" I asked. "Water lines, utility?" Rick dug deeper. "You're gonna want to see this." He flipped to a notarized addendum from 1963. "Your grandfather negotiated exclusive groundwater access to Carson Spring. Runs straight under that east ridge." My chest tightened. That creek had fed our livestock and fields for generations. If Vista Elms wanted water, and by the look of their sprawling lawns, they needed a lot of it, they had to come through us. Can they reroute it? Not without violating the easement. And if they already did, that's civil court, Rick nodded grimly. And they'll have lawyers. I left the county office with a manila folder, thick with proof, and a pit growing in my gut. It wasn't just about views or barns. Vivian wanted water, control, and she was using bureaucracy as her bulldozer. When I got back to the ranch, there were new flags in the dirt, bright pink stakes leading across my lower pasture. I followed them until they crossed directly into the wheat field, ending at a metal post where a laminated sign flapped in the wind, "Future Site of Vista Elms. Community Amphitheater. Construction begins May 5th. I stared at it, heart pounding. This wasn't just overstepping, it was invasion. Bruno barked behind me as a familiar white SUV rolled down the ridge road. Vivian stepped out, clipboard in hand, sunglasses hiding whatever satisfaction danced in her eyes. "You're trespassing," I said, voice low. "We're surveying," she replied. "According to updated parcel maps, this area now falls under Vista Elms jurisdiction." I held up my folder. "Not according to these." Vivian didn't flinch. "Then I suggest you hire a lawyer, Mr. Cole. This is above your pay grade." She turned and left, heels cracking against gravel like a gavel on Judgment Day. I looked down at the flags, then at my barn, then back at the sign. They were writing my legacy out of existence. I wasn't about to let them finish the story. By the following morning, the stakes had multiplied. Literally. Dozens of them now pierced through my north field. Bright plastic daggers cutting across the tall, golden stalks like a battle line. I couldn't tell if it was arrogance or strategy. But they hadn't even tried to be subtle. It was like Vivian wanted to provoke me. Bruno barked as I walked toward the edge of the property. A black pickup I didn't recognize idled by the gate. Two men in khaki vests and sunglasses were unloading what looked like surveying equipment. Another was on his knees with a tablet, taking photos of the dirt like it had committed a crime. "Can I help you?" I called out, voice firm but level. The one with the tablet stood up. "Environmental inspection. HOA authorization. You're standing on private land." He gave me a dry smile. "According to county files, this plot's contested. We're well within our rights." "Show me the order." He didn't flinch, just tapped his tablet. "It's digital. I'm gonna need to see something printed." He stared at me for a beat, then turned his back and kept working. I stood there, jaw tight, fists balled. Every minute they were on my land felt like another nail in the coffin of my family's legacy. This wasn't just bureaucratic overreach anymore. It was a slow, surgical invasion. Precise, deliberate. That evening, I called Sandra. She was my last Hail Mary, my college roommate turned environmental and property law attorney, who now spent most of her time suing corrupt land developers in California. Vivian Whitfield, I said into the phone. Vista Elms, HOA president. Ever heard the name? There was a long pause. I've crossed her path, Sandra replied. What's going on? I filled her in. Everything from the bogus violation notice to the water rights to the staked amphitheater. You've got a case, she said, but you'll need evidence, real, indisputable proof. Paperwork's good, but what you need is motive and misconduct. What kind of misconduct? Anything that ties her HOA's agenda to personal profit, conflict of interest, misuse of public records, especially if she altered survey results or filed backdated permits. I rubbed my forehead. How do I find that? You don't, she said. I do. Forward everything you have. I'm on the next flight. Click. I stared at the phone, equal parts hopeful and nervous. If Sandra was flying in, this had officially escalated from neighbor dispute to legal war. Later that night, the fire started. I had just finished dinner when I saw the orange glow from the kitchen window. At first, I thought it was the sunset catching weird on the trees. But then Bruno started barking like mad and the glow grew brighter. I ran outside barefoot. My entire western fence line was ablaze. Flames danced 6 feet high, snapping and crackling, as they devoured the dry grass along the edge of the pasture. I grabbed the hose, yanked it to full extension, and started spraying. But the water pressure was pitiful. The flames weren't spreading fast. It wasn't windy, but it was still a damn fire. By the time the volunteer fire crew arrived, I had most of it under control. They doused the last of the hot spots and walked the perimeter with me. One of them, a young guy named Mason, crouched down and picked something up with gloved fingers. Gas can cap, he said, holding it up. You think it was intentional? I asked. He nodded grimly. Looks like an accelerant line, too. Somebody wanted this to catch and move fast. That was all I needed to hear. I didn't sleep that night. Between the fire, the stakes, and the looming permits, it felt like the entire universe was conspiring to uproot everything my family had built. I sat on the porch in the dark, documents scattered across my lap, listening to Bruno snore and the distant hum of irrigation pumps. Vivian didn't just want my land. She wanted to erase me. But I had something she didn't know about yet, something she'd never expect. The land remembers everything, and it was about to speak. Sandra arrived the next morning with 3 things: a carry-on suitcase, a laptop bag, and the energy of someone about to dismantle an empire with a stapler and a court order. She didn't even pause to hug me. Show me the office, she said, already pulling her hair back into a bun. I led her into the den, what used to be my father's reading room and had slowly become my command center. Papers were scattered across the dining table and floor. Historical maps, deeds, HOA notices, photos of the bulldozers, photos of the burn line. Sandra raised an eyebrow. You weren't kidding. I told you, I muttered. They're trying to take the land and turn it into some utopian HOA Disney World. She nodded, already flipping open her laptop and scanning the PDFs I'd emailed. We need 3 things to nail this down: motive, method, and malpractice, she said. Motive we already know, land and water. But the method, that's what will sink her. And malpractice? Conflict of interest, illegal profit. Paper trails that contradict what she's told residents. She paused, tapping one document. This easement here, she said. The one your grandfather granted back in 1952. Did you know it includes a clause about revocation if any non-agricultural development encroaches within 100 feet? My eyes widened. I read that line. I didn't think it still applied. It does, she said, because no one ever rescinded it. Legally, this entire HOA development has been in breach of that agreement since they expanded the second cul-de-sac. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of hope returning for the first time in days. So we can fight them? She smiled. We're not just going to fight. We're going to expose them. Sandra spent the next few hours digging into county building permits and land sales. She cross-referenced company names on HOA documents with corporate ownership records from the state. That's when she found it. Bingo, she whispered. I walked over. What is it? This LLC, Greenpoint Holdings. It's listed as the project developer for the Sunny Meadows Wellness Center, right? Yeah, that's what they said. She spun her laptop toward me. Greenpoint is owned by a trust. And that trust traces back to Vivian Whitfield. My jaw clenched. So she's personally profiting from the community garden project? And every other HOA-backed development they're pushing, Sandra confirmed. This isn't about beautifying the neighborhood. It's about using HOA power to force land seizures and inflate her private company's real estate value. And no one knows? Of course not. She's hidden it under 3 layers of shell companies. But now that we've followed the money, it's only a matter of time before the county and the courts catch up. We kept digging. Rick showed up around 3 p.m. with a box of physical records and a 6-pack of root beer. He looked exhausted. I've been up all night going through meeting minutes and approval forms, he said, dropping the box. Found something interesting. He pulled out a meeting transcript from 2 years ago. Look at this line, he pointed. They discussed rezoning the southern edge of your land and quietly voted on it, without notifying you or any neighboring landowners. That's illegal under the state's open meeting laws. Sandra grinned. Unlawful process. We've got them on at least 3 violations. Then, she opened her laptop again and pulled up drone footage I'd saved. Let's not forget this, she said, playing the clip. Vivian, standing on my land with her tablet, directing a crew as they planted plastic stakes deep into soil my great-grandfather had bled into. Trespassing, documented. Sandra looked up at me. You ready for a war? I nodded. I've been ready since they tore down my wheat. She zipped her bag closed. Then let's burn their house of paper to the ground. By the time the next Sunny Meadows HOA meeting was scheduled, word had spread like wildfire. What started as whispers in grocery store aisles became heated conversations on porches, then open calls for a reckoning. Karen Whitfield may have started this war, but the people she tried to manipulate were now demanding answers. And I wasn't walking into that meeting alone anymore. On the day of the meeting, over 300 residents showed up. Oak Ridge folks, farmers from neighboring counties, even a few small business owners who'd been fined or pushed out by HOA regulations. The community center parking lot overflowed. Someone set up folding chairs outside and live-streamed the meeting on their phone. Inside, the board looked nervous. Vivian sat at the head of the table, dressed in an immaculate navy suit, lips tight, posture rigid. Beside her, Doug Wilson fidgeted with his pen like it was a detonator. When the meeting began, Vivian tried to take control. This emergency session, she said calmly, was called to address the misinformation and escalating hostility being directed at this board. I stood up from the second row, cleared my throat. With all due respect, I said, it's not misinformation when we have the receipts. Sandra walked up beside me, holding a stack of documents. Rick followed, wheeling in a whiteboard and a file box labeled Exhibit A, Z. We're here on behalf of dozens of affected citizens, Sandra said, and we'll be presenting evidence of illegal land acquisition, fraudulent documentation, and intentional manipulation of HOA policies for personal financial gain. Vivian's eyes narrowed. This is not a court of law. Not yet, Sandra replied smoothly. But I've already filed preliminary injunctions with the county court this morning. Murmurs erupted across the room. Then came the photos, the bulldozers, the falsified maps, the HOA fines sent to homeowners just before their houses were quietly sold to LLCs tied to Vivian's trust. One of the moms in the third row stood up, holding up a bill. You charged us $450 for a wisteria overgrowth violation, she said, her voice shaking. 2 weeks later, my husband lost his job and we were offered $30,000 below market to sell. Now I know why. A retired veteran named Carl pointed at Doug. You threatened to call the county on me because I built a wheelchair ramp. I've lived here longer than Sunny Meadows has existed. The room grew more volatile with every testimony. Then Rick pulled out the easement map. This, he pointed, is the original waterline map. Every drop of water flowing into Oak Ridge Estates runs through James's property. The easement says, if it's used to support commercial or non-agricultural developments without consent, the agreement is void. That's not speculation. That's law. Vivian's face paled for the first time. You think this changes anything? She snapped, turning toward the crowd. Without this HOA, your property values will collapse. This community will fall into chaos. No, someone shouted back. Without this corruption, we might finally have peace. The moment broke wide open. People stood and began chanting. New board! New board! Vivian slammed her gavel. This meeting is adjourned. No, I said firmly, stepping forward. We're not finished. The door at the back opened, and in walked Sheriff Alvarez, followed by 2 deputies. He nodded to me, then faced the crowd. We've been reviewing all submitted evidence, the sheriff said, and I've received confirmation from the county clerk's office and state land department. This HOA has operated beyond the legal bounds of its charter. He turned to Vivian. Mrs. Whitfield, you are hereby placed under investigation for fraud, unlawful land seizure, and misuse of public utility access. You are to step down as board president immediately. Gasps and cheers erupted. Vivian stood slowly, eyes blazing with fury. You have no idea who you're messing with. Oh, I think we do, Sandra said quietly from beside me. As deputies escorted Vivian and Doug out of the building, a strange silence followed. Then someone clapped. Then another. Soon the room erupted into cheers, people hugging, laughing, even crying. Not because the war was over, but because, for the first time, they felt seen. I looked at the faces around me. People who'd been fined, bullied, manipulated. Now standing proud, arms crossed, shoulders squared. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding. Together. The days following the HOA's collapse were a whirlwind. News trucks camped outside the Sunny Meadows sign for nearly a week. Reporters knocked on every door. Karen's name trended on local Twitter threads, her mugshot circulating like wildfire. A few folks even printed it on T-shirts that read, "Don't mess with the farmer." But the dust, like it always does, eventually settled. And when it did, the real work began. On a crisp Monday morning, I stood at the edge of the East Field, what was once a scarred patch of earth, bulldozed by arrogance and greed. Now, volunteers lined up shoulder to shoulder, neighbors who used to glance away when I passed by, retirees with gardening gloves, teenagers dragging buckets of mulch, mothers balancing babies on hips while planting saplings. Maria Gonzalez, the new HOA president, elected unanimously after the scandal, stepped up beside me. She offered a fresh cup of coffee and smiled. Ready? Born ready, I replied. We weren't just rebuilding. We were reclaiming. The county had officially ruled in my favor. My property boundaries were upheld, my water rights reasserted, and all development permits issued under false pretenses were nullified. Karen and Doug now faced civil suits from over 60 homeowners, some of whom had lost their homes under fraudulent buyouts. And Vivian? She'd taken an early retirement in another state. But none of that felt as powerful as what was happening right here, right now. Because where bulldozers once tore through my wheat, neighbors now sowed wildflowers. And where red surveyor flags once threatened expansion, we raised handmade signs that read, "Community grows here, with consent, not control." It was Rick's idea to create the Meadow Market, An open-air community space where I'd lease a small portion of my land on my terms for rotating farm stands, workshops, and school visits. And every Saturday, families from Oak Ridge strolled through my land not with entitlement, but gratitude. The first day it opened, a little girl approached me with a crayon drawing of my barn. "I drew your red barn," she said shyly. "My mom says it's older than my grandma." I knelt down. "That barn's been here since 1937. It's seen storms, droughts, and now you." She smiled and ran off to the honey stand. Later that week, Sheriff Alvarez came by, not to investigate, but to drop off a plaque from the county, in honor of the Miller family, for stewardship, resilience, and community leadership. I hung it inside the barn, just beneath the old photograph of my grandfather holding a scythe, smiling in the sunlight. But not everything was sunshine and hayrides. There were still court hearings, still angry letters from Karen's lawyers, still homeowners struggling to untangle themselves from years of bad contracts. Doug tried to run for local office. He lost, spectacularly. The community had seen enough of wolves in polos. And while the land was healing, so was I. Because fighting for something doesn't come without cost. I'd lost time, crops, trust. And for weeks I'd been running on anger alone. But now, in the quiet between seasons, I could finally feel peace return like the morning dew. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the wheat in liquid gold, I sat on the porch with Bruno, watching kids chase fireflies where bulldozers once prowled. Rick joined me, a beer in hand. "Funny, isn't it?" he said. "How one woman's obsession nearly tore apart a town." "And a farm," I added. He nodded. "But you didn't just win back your land. You gave people something to believe in again." I took a long sip and exhaled. "Guess that's the difference between building fences and building trust." Down by the creek, the new irrigation lines glistened, part of a shared system now managed by the town, thanks to a cooperative we'd started with the help of Sandra's legal connections. Everyone chipped in. Everyone had a say. This time, no one stood above anyone else. As the stars blinked to life, I felt a strange, overwhelming gratitude for the land, for the people, even for the battle itself. Because without it, I might have never known how much one voice, steady, stubborn, and standing on the truth, could echo through a town and turn silence into solidarity. Bruno gave a tired huff, leaned against my leg, and closed his eyes. I scratched behind his ear and whispered, "We're home, boy, and this time we're not going anywhere."